With that, we're going to start here in a minute, but at the end of the presentation, just a reminder to everybody that the presentation is recorded. If you want to pick that up and review it, it'll be posted at fnsb.gov/budget. And at that same website, there's a whole bunch of other content that we prepared for our 2021-22 fiscal year budget. Just as a reminder also, before we finally get going here, we are taking comments on the budget right now. We can take them by mail. You can deliver them to the mayor's office at 907 Terminal Street, Fairbanks, Alaska 99701. Or if you prefer to do email, you can do fnsblistens@fnsb.gov. If you want to just call us, 459-1304. We'll have a friendly voice to listen to your concerns and questions. Or you could just drop off a comment. We have comment cards right here at the Juanita Helms Administrative Center. You can come in right there at the security guard desk or trundle on up to the third floor. We'll get you a card and you can write that down and get it to us and we'll get your questions answered. So without further ado, it is now 5:03 p.m. I'm going to stop talking and I'm going to introduce Mayor Bryce Ward. He is the presenter tonight for the first Budget Town Hall Community Forum. Mayor Ward, the floor is yours, sir.
Great, thanks, Jim. Jacob, if you want to throw up our first slide. We've got about 25 slides to go through tonight. This is going to be kind of a high-level overview of budget development and the budget process here at the borough. So I do want to make sure and clarify for everyone that's on tonight, our budget is not finalized yet. We have not put out to public. In fact, we haven't actually finished with the budgetary numbers and the setting of the numbers yet. So that's going to be something that is released in April. April 7th is the date that we have for release of that. And then it's going to be heard. I guess it's going to be presented to the Assembly on the 10th and then throughout the rest of the Saturdays in April. So long as we have the need for that time. So today what we're going to be talking about is the budget development process and considerations that go into the development of the budget. So a lot of times it seems like this big mysterious document. We spend lots of money, we do lots of things with it. And I really wanted to kind of peel back the layers and talk about what the administration goes through, what staff go through as we develop this, and then hear from you, from the community on things that we should be considering coming up on this next budget cycle. And as I mentioned, we haven't finalized things yet, so there still is time for us to make some of those adjustments as we move into this next season. So I'm going to refer you back to our website a lot tonight, fnsb.gov. If you go to the government tab, we have a special budget page that we've stood up where you can find links to this presentation right now. So if you want to follow at home on your own smart device or on your own computer, you can have access to this entire presentation. You can cheat and get ahead of me if you want. Or you can go there to view other documents that we've got, such as a public participation plan, also to look at our budget timeline. And I'm going to talk more about that tonight. So let's get started. Jacob, if you could go to the next slide, please. Okay, so I just want to talk a little bit high level about who we are and what we are. The Fairbanks North Star Borough is a second-class borough. We were incorporated January 1st. It's a good day. It's my birthday. 1964, under the provisions of the State of Alaska Boroughs Act, Mandatory Boroughs Act of 1963. The borough covers 7,361 square miles and has an estimated population of just under 97,000 as of last year. Next slide, please. The borough operates under a mayor assembly form of government. It's a strong mayor form of government. The mayor is the chief executive officer and can introduce legislation, has veto power, and manages the everyday operations of the borough. However, I don't vote on the assembly. That's a distinction between us and the cities. The borough exercises services based on powers that are granted to us by statute or by the voters. There are 3 mandatory powers required of all second-class boroughs, which we've done since our inception. The first is assessment and tax collection, schools, and planning, platting, and land use regulation. We've been doing those since we were created. We've also taken on additional powers. Next slide, please. These powers are operated through kind of a different schemes, if you will. We have an area-wide authority. We have a non-area-wide authority, which includes areas outside the cities. We have a special district, which includes areas outside the cities and one of the cities. And then we have service areas. So area-wide, example of area-wide powers, the things that the borough does that we collect tax for is education, elections, planning, platting, and land use, animal control, flood control, libraries, air pollution, E911, solid waste disposal, which is the landfill, not the collection district, parks and recreation, public transportation, health and social services as a pass-through, and the natural gas utility. The non-area wide, as I mentioned, is areas outside of the cities of North Pole and Fairbanks. We exercise firework control, emergency disaster powers, emergency medical services, economic development. As I mentioned, these are exercised outside the cities. Our special district is the solid waste collection district. This is the city of North Pole and the remaining portion of the borough. And it's exercised as a mill levy component of your property taxes for basically everywhere except Fairbanks. These are the transfer sites. This is the solid waste collection district. We then also operate service areas. These are special service districts for specific purposes. We have road maintenance and construction, fire protection, sewage disposal, and streetlights in specific areas all across the borough. These service districts all set their own rates, which we collect and then remit to those districts for as part of their the powers that they exercise. Next slide, please. So let's talk about basics of the budget. That's what we're here to talk about tonight. So the budget is really an interesting document. The budget is the policy document that is used to guide spending, and then the appropriation is the actual authorization to carry out the goals of the budget. So we have the budget presentation, the budget book, if you will, and then we have the appropriations, the ordinance that comes along with it. The appropriation is the tool that the assembly has to authorize spending by fund and department. So that is the, if you will, that's the bill that we use to go and provide the services that we do for the borough. Let's see here. The budget sets estimates of revenues and expenditures, and it's up to the administration to monitor spending and revenues to ensure fiscal constraint if revenues are not met. So we look at the need that we have, the budgeted expenses, and then we also look at the revenue and make sure that we're actually bringing in the revenue that we projected. So the budget is developed by taking, I hear we do have someone that's got their mute off. If you wouldn't mind putting your mute on, that would be great. It looks like, okay, we got that taken care of. Thank you. Okay, so the budget is developed taking into consideration local, statewide, and national environments. We want to make sure that we're being mindful of the environment in which we're looking at the budget year in. And it is the largest policy document approved by the Assembly each year. Next slide, please. So this year is a little bit different in our budget because we are taking a little bit of extra time. We want to sit down and make sure that we are providing a clear mechanism and a path for the public to stay engaged in our budget process. So right now, as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, this is pre-budget release. We have not released the budget yet. We are in the development phase of it. And that's why it's really important after our presentation tonight to hear from you what considerations we should be looking at for this upcoming year. So as part of our plan, we put together a public participation plan. We wanted to make sure that we were being very thoughtful in our approach to reach out to community members and to our residents on the budget process and really make sure that we're doing the work that's needed to educate, to be able to hear feedback. So we kind of came up with this concept. There's 4 components to it, 4 principles, if you will, to first inform. That informs both the assembly and the community to engage with the community, to listen to the community, and then respond to what we've heard in regards to the budget. So this is our public participation plan. This document can be found on our webpage, fnsb.gov/budget. It's also under the government tab on the home page. Next slide, please. As part of this, we've also put together a budget timeline. And this is the tool that we're going to use over the next few months to share with you on opportunities to be able to provide comment, to provide feedback, and learn more about the budget process. So things start off today with our budget listening session on March 9th, where we give a presentation on budget policies, goals for the upcoming year, and kind of our economic outlook. And then we have a number of assembly meetings between now and ultimately when the budget is adopted and the mill rate and mill levies are set in June. So this is also, as I mentioned, available on the website, fnsb.gov/budget. And then this is something I would really encourage folks to use. We've identified citizens' comments periods by the star. And so that's the opportunity for the public to come in and provide citizens' comments on items not on the agenda. These are all assembly meetings that are open for public discussion on anything or any public discourse, I guess, on what you would like to see happen. We do have a specific day set aside for a public hearing on the budget. That's May 6th, potentially May 13th if the assembly does not close public hearing. So that is a really important day. It's identified by the blue star on this timeline as the time for official public comment on the budget. And all of those comments go in through the clerk's office. The clerk takes those comments and shares them with assembly members and the administration throughout this time. So we do have a couple other dates on here identified by the bar, if you will, or the color of the bar. So purple are mayor's meetings. The blue, the dark blue, are public meetings. We have the light blue as informational updates. So this will be like the state of the borough, which is when we'll be addressing the community to talk about the budget and the state of our borough for the last year. And then we also have this green section, which is our budget work sessions. These are, I should say, the assembly budget work sessions. And so these are open to the public. There's no testimony or comment taken, but it's a great way for you to listen in on and hear the departments give their presentation for their budgets. So make sure and mark your calendar down for these days. And you can find more information on the the meeting times and where those are held on the borough's webpage if you go to the assembly schedule. That's under the government tab as well. Next slide, please. So the budget development timeline, as I mentioned, we begin work with our financial services department and directors in December, and then we start to really get down to work in January and February. And then by March, we have to be done. It takes a lot of work to put everything together, to balance out all of our funds, to make sure that everything ties back to our projected mill levy and our estimated taxes. So we are, by code, I have to propose my budget to the assembly by the first Thursday following the 1st April of the month. And we plan on doing that on the 7th for this upcoming year. Taxable values for the budget year are estimated by the end of January. As you may notice, you've got your assessment notices. That's a very important tool that we use for determining how much we have for resources that are available. The borough assessor has to certify the roll. This is certified the tax value of the borough properties by June 1st. And then the mill rates have to be set by the assembly before June 15th. And then just after that, by July 1st, tax bills are sent out. Next slide, please. So fiscal policy, these are a couple really important components to development of the budget. I would refer folks back to attachment B of the budget ordinances. So you can look at our prior year budgets for these policies. These are approved by the assembly every year as part of the appropriations ordinance. These policies are used to develop the budget and make decisions on resource allocation and provide guidance for our different funds and fiscal operations. So these are a couple of the considerations. These are summarized that are in the fiscal policies. All current operating expenditures are to be paid for from current and excess revenue. You can't use something that you project. Debt will not be used to cover current operating expenses. If there are revenue shortfalls, cuts will be, we will use expenditure cuts to cover the gap first. We will strive to have diversified and stable revenue systems in place to mitigate short-run fluctuations and aggressively seek grants with emphasis for capital improvement. We'll also conservatively apply the voter-approved tax cap. Next slide, please. Another few policies, the borough will maintain an unassigned fund balance for the general fund of 17% of the greater of either the most recent audited prior year expenditure level or the most recently adopted annual appropriation level. For service areas, we have a separate or a different minimum fund, general fund, minimum fund unassigned balance. For expenditures less than 500, for service areas with expenditures less than 500,000, the target reserve amount is 20%. They're smaller, a little bit more vulnerable to some of those fluctuations. And then for funds, for other funds with expenditures greater than 500,000, the target reserve amount is 10%. Next slide, please. So the unrestricted fund balance targets. I want to talk a little bit about what this means. The unrestricted fund balance is a portion of the total fund balance that is not restricted by action of an outside agency. These designations are governed by rules adopted by the GASB Board, Governmental Accounting Standards Board. Unrestricted fund balance available the unrestricted fund balance available in the general fund is viewed by rating agencies and financial professionals as a general level indicator of the financial well-being of the borough or of our organization. The GFOA recommends that you have 2 months of revenues or 16.7%. The borough has established, as I mentioned through policy, that the general fund target is 17% of expenditures, not revenues, as and we exclude from consideration resources that are committed or assigned. Next slide, please. So the administration goals for the budget. These are the things that I use in development of the budget. They can change with administrations, but these are the ones I want to share with you that I use when developing the upcoming budget. First is I want to look at maintaining stability in the services that the borough is currently providing. Stability is a very big part of that. Create efficiencies in the organization through automation and systems improvement. So find efficiencies within our organization, and then maintain or lower the mill rate if possible. Also encourage development of new construction in the borough, and you'll find out a little bit later why that's so important. Remove barriers for development, and then streamline our government processes. Make it easier for folks to maneuver and understand. Next slide, please. So major cost drivers to the borough budget. When we look at developing the budget, what are the things that we're really concerned about that have the ability to move the pendulum really dramatically in one direction or another? So the first one is contractual increases, our wages. Those are a very big component of what the borough does. A majority of our costs are tied to our wages, the employees that we have to provide the services for our community. Cost, CPI, or the cost of inflation. This is a very big driver for our budget as well, tied back to our contractual increases, as well as our other contractual increases we have for services throughout the borough. Benefits, as example, employee healthcare costs, workers' compensation, employer social security tax, etc. As I mentioned, our contracts, we have other service contracts throughout the borough which have increases that are built in as part of those contractual agreements. Commodities and utilities, just as everyone else in the borough pays for fuel oil and for electricity, the borough is a very big consumer of those as well. Other things to consider also are the local delinquency rates. So as we look at a majority of our primary revenue stream for the borough is property tax. If we have a large or an uptick in our delinquency rate, that affects the amount of revenue that we're able to collect through that mechanism. The cost of insurance. As many of you may know, this last year with a pandemic has been definitely has driven the insurance market up, as well as natural disasters. Insurance is a big cost driver for the borough. Debt and bonding, looking at servicing our debt, which ties directly into school funding. Part of that is school debt reimbursement, looking at those revenue streams that we historically have seen from the state that are currently not there. Our school funding component, a very large component of what our property tax goes for, is directly tied to schools. Last year our budget was just over $49 million for the school district. And then also this is a new thing in the last couple of years, a code required contribution to the FMR. This is our facilities maintenance reserve, what we use to fund our capital improvement program. Next slide, please. Revenue projections. So a big part of developing our budget is not only looking at the expenditure side of things, but also looking at the revenue side. We use historical data to help give estimates of our sales tax and excise taxes. That's a really good indicator. We also look at new businesses opening that may be paying into that. and how that would affect the overall revenue stream. The borough does collect sales tax, as I mentioned, on alcohol, tobacco, hotel, motel stays, and marijuana. We also have revenue streams that come in from investment earnings. So as many of you know, if you're in the investment arena, earnings have been pretty dismal lately. That affects the borough as well. And as I mentioned earlier, property tax is the largest revenue source for the borough. As of the last budget, just over 75% of the total revenue that we collect comes in through property tax. And then we also have state and federal revenues, community assistance, federal PILT, school debt bond reimbursement. Other considerations that we look at for revenue projections are new construction, commercial and residential. This is for property tax. We also look at appreciation and depreciation and exemptions. So these are all things that affect the tax base. Next slide, please. Okay, so the budget approach. How do we look at what are the theories that we use for development of our budget? Most governments use something called incremental budget theory as a basis for their budget development. This theory uses the prior year budget numbers and accounts for known cost increases. So when you have a stable system, you have a stable service model that you're using, tends to be a good model, what most people revert back to because it's also consistent. You look at, if you're looking at increases, you're able to just look at, okay, what is the cost increase from the prior year to this year? There's another model called zero-based budgeting, which is when all expenses must be justified for the operating year. Budgets are then built around what is needed for the upcoming year. We typically use this theory when we're developing a new program or implementing a major change to a department. It's not what we use consistently for the entire budget, but it is a tool that we do use for some of these components. Together, these two budget processes create a pretty comprehensive review or comprehensive approach to develop our budget. I also do want to note that the budget is presented with much more detail than the adopted budget actually is adopted by the Assembly. This allows for the Assembly to have greater detail on a lot of the independent expenditure lines to make adjustments should they see fit, or increase lines if they so desire. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's talk about the mill rate and property taxes. So a mill rate is, our millage rate is the tax that's used to calculate our local taxes. A millage means 1,000th or 1,000th. The term millage rate is also referred to as a millionth of the property tax rate. So what this means is this is how we calculate when we have a percentage or a rate. It's calculated against the value of your property. So the actual sales value, assessed value, and taxable value of your house may not be the same. The borough appraised value is what the borough assessor reports your house is worth for the purposes of calculating your property tax bills of January 1st of the tax year. The taxable assessed value is the figure you actually pay taxes on. So the borough appraised value of your home depends on the assessor's determination, and then the taxable value may be lower because of other things such as exemptions or adjustments that are made to the total taxable value. So for instance, two of our primary exemptions that we have is the homeowner exemption and the senior citizen disabled veteran exemption. Next slide, please. So I just talked about full value versus the total taxable value. So the full value of the borough is calculated as the value of all real property within the boundaries. This is a very important number for us. It's used by the state for determining school contributions. And it's a very important number. We have to certify, our assessor certifies the full value of the borough every year. The job of the assessor is to calculate that as close to the market value as possible. The total taxable value is the value of the taxable real property. So it's basically the full value minus the exemptions or statutory allowed reductions. It will always be lower than the full value. So this is the taxable amount. So we've got, for us, it's roughly $10 billion in total value for the borough. And then we have roughly, I think, $8 billion in taxable value. And that's really important. The taxable value of the borough is incredibly important for determining the actual rate that we pay. Next slide, please. So this is a slide that the Chief of Staff put together. Very much thanks for doing that work. This looks at our historical mill rates and values over time. So we've got actually four different lines here. We've got the area-wide mill rate. We've got our net taxable value in billions, the area-wide mill rate at the cap, and then the full rate, the full value in billions. So you can see the upper line, the kind of red dashed line is the full value. That is the full value of all the property within the borough. Let's see here, the net taxable value in billions is the line underneath that. That's the solid red line. So that is the amount of value that we're actually taxing. If you look at the dotted blue line, that's the area-wide mill rate at the cap. So we'll talk a little bit about what the property tax cap, or excuse me, the revenue tax cap is later. But this is calculated every year. It is the most amount of revenue that we're able to, tax revenue that we're able to receive based on that voter initiative. And then the blue line, the area-wide mill rate, is where our actual mill rate has landed. And so you can see from 2007 to roughly 2017, we were at least a mill under the cap pretty consistently. Between 2017 and 18, we were right at the cap. And then we've diverged since 2018, 19 and 20. And you can see we actually have a very large gap in the difference between the tax cap and then between what we're actually our current rate is. And we can talk a little bit about that later. Next slide, please. And as I mentioned, for folks that have joined us, all of these slides and the public participation plan and our budget timeline are available on our website. That's fnsb.gov/budget. Or you can go to the government tab on our main page and then find budget, the budget tab there. This is going to be our one-stop shop coming up for all things budget. So we'll have the mayor's proposed budget in there, as well as some videos that talk more about some of these aspects we're talking about tonight. Property taxes, talk about overall just revenues for the borough. Goodness, I have a hole in my lip. All right, so this is an example of our property tax rate and levy process. So through November and March, we determine the budget and revenue needs. We look at, okay, is this going to be within the cap, not within the cap? Between January and April, we're determining our net taxable property values. That's the job that our assessors do. And then June, we set our area specific mill rates. These are the mill levies that you pay for your service districts, for the general government, for education, and our bonding, et cetera. And then July is when we issue our tax notices. So this is an example of how we look at the overall system, if you will, for developing property tax rates. As was mentioned earlier, we talked about exemptions. So there's an example at the bottom of the page where we have a assessed value of a home of $250,000. We currently allow for a homeowner exemption up to $50,000, which means that your assessed value may be $250,000, but your net taxable value is based on $200,000. And so at the rate $200,000 times 1/1000th mill rate, the 12.805, what we have in here as an example, gives you your total tax of $2,570. Next slide. So this slide, this is an actual tax bill, and I wanted to kind of explain how it looks, what you see on your property tax. So you see on the right-hand side, we've got the different categories, or it says current taxes levied for, and these explain the different areas. So this particular property, we see there's a general government tax, we have an education tax, a school bond tax to pay for those the bonds for schools. We have the SWCD, which is a solid waste collection district. So that's the district that is the city of North Pole and all areas outside the borough. We then have the non-area wide fund for EMS. This is that pays for the ambulances to come. It's also on an area wide basis. So it's our non-area wide basis, it's outside the cities. We have another non-area wide basis rate for economic development. And then we've got a general government bond. This is for some small library bonds that we have out there. And then if you're in a service district, it will be listed at this point. You can see at the bottom of the bill. And it tells you on that center column, the rate per $1,000 of value. So this is your mill rate that you pay for each one of these particular items. From there, you take that multiplied by the value of the property. So we see here the assessed value for this property is $34,227. times that rate, and that gives you the amount that you pay. So we see for this particular property, we're paying $224 roughly for general government, $194, $195 for education, $53 for school bonds, $57 for the solid waste collection district. For EMS, it's $19 a year. Economic development is $1.88. General government is $1.92. And then the North Star Fire Service District paying $50.96 a year for that service. Next slide, please. So how are property taxes collected? Property taxes are calculated based on the total revenue demand needed for the budget and the value of all taxable property in the borough. So we talked about that, the total taxable value versus the full value. The borough tax assessor is required by state law to assign a correct value for all real property within the taxing jurisdiction. The borough assessor is also responsible to assign a statutory exemptions and local options for all the properties. So this is your homeowner exemption. This is the senior citizen disabled veteran exemption, or if you have an economic development exemption, there's a few other ones that are allowed in code. So the assessor is the one that applies that to the property. The total value for all property in the borough last year was just over $10 billion, $10,297,055,608. From that number, as I mentioned, the borough assessor subtracts the exempt values, which gives us a total taxable value, and that's what we use to calculate the actual rate. So there's two variables in determining the tax rate: an increase in the revenue demand from the budget, or an increase in expenditures would drive the rate up, or a decrease in the total taxable value will drive up the rate as well. The budget is sustainable from year to year when the taxable value increases at the same rate as the budget. So example, if the budget grows 1%, then in order to see that rate not change, the total taxable value has to grow 1%. And that includes other revenue streams as well. Next slide. So calculating the tax cap, this is another component to developing the budget that's really important. So it is the current year tax revenues. So we look at the current year budget that we're in, plus all other tax revenue, minus the current year bonds, less the school debt bond reimbursement, which we have and have not received over the last few years, plus the net taxes levied times the urban Alaska CPI, plus the total exclusions, looking at new construction, new year bond payments, new services, new judgments, and emergency appropriations. And then that gives you the max allowable tax revenue. So next slide, let's talk about the tax revenue cap, what that is. Okay, let's go back. I'm sorry. So the tax revenue cap. So the tax revenue cap is it's not a tax cap. It's not a revenue cap. So it does not cap the amount of taxes, the rate of taxes. It does not cap the total revenue that the borough is able to collect. What it does is it limits the total tax revenue that the borough is able to collect, which is not all of the revenue we collect. As I mentioned earlier, we have interest earnings. We also have fees and fees that are collected through our services, land sales, etc. So tax revenue cap really looks at the total taxes that you're able, the total revenue from the taxes that you're able to collect. Next slide, please. Okay, we'll go back to property tax and talk about your assessment notice. So this is usually sent out by February 1st. The assessing department is responsible for assessing the full value of all properties within the borough. Property values are used to calculate the taxes and determine the mandatory local school funding according to state law. It's an important component why we have to do that for the state. And then exemptions are provided by law, and the assessor is responsible for that. So I do want to add, if you do disagree with the value of your property, encourage folks to come down and speak with the assessor to ensure that we have the correct information, such as the quality of construction, the correct usage, and square footage. If you still disagree, we do have an appeal process where you can present your case to the Citizens Board of Equalization. However, you do have 30 days to appeal your valuation from the date in which the assessment notice was printed. Next slide, please. Okay, your tax bill. Most tax bills are sent out by July 1st and can be paid in 2 installments. First installment is due in September, second is due in November, And the borough is responsible for collecting taxes for all jurisdictions to include the cities and service areas. As I mentioned earlier, you may notice that your tax bill is broken into subcategories to reflect those. If you were within the city, for instance, under the services area on that tax bill we looked at earlier, you would see something for the city of Fairbanks or North Pole. If you don't pay your taxes timely, you are subject to penalties, interest, and ultimately tax foreclosure. And that foreclosure process takes about 3 years. Next slide, please. Understanding the borough budget document. So we, as I mentioned in the beginning of the presentation, we've got really two components to our budget process. We've got the budget document, and we also have the appropriations ordinance. The borough budget is broken out by department and taxing jurisdiction. And the proposed budget has a lot more detail than actually what is adopted by the Assembly, because they adopt at the fund and department level. There is a great resource in the borough budget. It's the Reader's Guide. It's found in the introduction section, and the budget summary tables, which go over the changes from year to year and talk about give the kind of brief synopsis of all of our departments. We're going to have some more budget videos that we're going to put out on fnsb.gov, or if you're interested, you can come to Assembly meeting and find out some more. Encourage you to come to those work sessions. Next slide. Okay, so we want to hear from you. I mentioned that we've got the Assembly has 3 budget work sessions that are coming up, April 10th, 17th, and 24th. Those are on Saturday. You can also listen to the State of the Borough and budget release on April 7th, where we'll actually lay out the plan, the full budget document. You can also contact the Assembly. If you contact them, it's assembly@fnsb.gov. That goes out to every member of the Assembly. And then we also are planning on doing another budget town hall on Wednesday, April 28th, with a question and answer section. We're also going to have the committee finance chair from the Assembly with us to be able to speak to the budget. You'll actually have the numbers by that time and can provide, we want to give a presentation on it and then have a question and answer session on that budget. And the official mechanism to testify in the budget is going to be May 6th, potentially the 13th if public hearing is extended, or you can provide comment to the Assembly through that email, assembly@fnsb.gov on the budget. Okay, so that's what I have for our budget presentation. We talked a little bit about the major levers that we look at, why we maybe look at some of these things differently than others. So at this point, we'd like to open it up to hear if there's questions on the budget process, or if there are concerns that folks have that you might want to share. So I think we were going to go through, Lenine is going to be managing the questions. We also do have a website, an email stood up if folks are interested in sending your questions off an email, and we can try to address them at that time.
So Mayor Ward, thank you for that. Why don't we go ahead again and turn it over to questions for folks. If you have a question that you'd like to ask, we ask that you go ahead and use the raise your hand feature. It should be at the bottom of your screen. And we've got the mayor and the chief of staff ready here to address questions. So we'll give folks a minute or a few seconds here to come up with some questions. And if we don't have anything to start, maybe we'll turn it over to Chief of Staff Jim Williams to pose a question first, please. I'm not seeing anything yet here. Folks are being shy.
So Lenine, what's that what's the email if folks wanted to email a comment in? Because we don't have a chat function. This is we don't have it as part of our Zoom setup for the borough because of Open Meetings Act stuff. So if you're interested, we do have an email set up that you can submit your comments to.
Absolutely, Mayor Ward. That email address to send a POM or public opinion message, which will go to all of our Assembly members as well as to administration. That email address is FNSB listens, FNSB listens at fnsb.gov. So that's how you could send an electronic public opinion message. And it looks like we have our first resident who would like to pose a question. And I can't see your last name, but first name is Nicole. So Nicole, we'll turn it over to you, please. Go ahead.
Hi, actually, I don't have a question, just a comment. I would have put it in the chat box. I just want to say how much I appreciate you doing this, Mayor Ward and staff. I think that it's, hooray for transparency and inviting involvement. So that's all. Thank you.
Great, thanks for that comment, Nicole. And we really want to make sure that we're getting this information out to our community to make sure folks can get educated, and just make sure we're leaving those channels of communication open. So I really appreciate you recognizing that. So we do have time. We've got lots of time for questions. If there's something that's just been burning in your mind as to, why does the borough do this? Or why don't you consider this different aspect as part of your budget development process? We've got time. We can go down that. We can talk about those things. I know Jim's got some seed questions. He's going to throw me some doozies here. So for those of you that don't know, Jim is the chief of staff here at the borough. He helps keep the wheels on the bus. I'm good at trying to back the lug nuts off at times, so he's back there tightening them up. So Jim, before we go to questions, I see we have, it looks like Michelle Goodwin has her hand up for a question. Michelle, the floor is yours if you'd like to take yourself off mute.
Okay, Mayor Ward, I have a question about last year you had a tool, I believe, on the website that allowed us to play around with the budget. Is that going to be offered again this year?
Yes, thank you, Michelle. So the tool that we had last year was called a balancing act. And it was a tool that we were able to use to put our budget numbers into and then allow the community to play around with. So you were able to look at, okay, if I made a reduction in a certain department, or if I made an increase in a certain area, what would that do to the overall system? So we are going to have that launched again as part of our April 7th launch of the budget. We're going to have the recommended budget, or I should say the mayor's recommended budget, and put into that system up online, and then you'll have opportunities to play with it and provide your comment too. So we used that last year. Folks were able to build their own budgets and then submit them, and it was a pretty neat thing to see. So, but yes, it will be shared with the community again. Okay, so go ahead and raise your hand. We do this sometimes if you can't find the raise the hand feature. We also have the opportunity to email us at fnsblistens@fnsb.gov. Is that right, Lenine?
Yes, sir, that is correct.
So go ahead and raise your hand. Jim, why don't you shoot me with a question?
Okay, Mayor. Speaking of wheels on the bus, this is a question we get quite frequently as we get further in the process. We get it almost every year. What's your plan for the school district this year with regards to the local contribution?
Great question. So the school district, the borough, as part of our mandatory powers, requires that we have a local contribution. So that is calculated by, they look at the total taxable value for the borough. And then that doesn't include the optional exemptions. So those are backed out, which actually kind of penalizes us in some ways. But what I have communicated with Dr. Gaborik, we started talking about budgets back in November and December, was that I was looking at maintaining the contribution to the schools over this next year. So despite the reduction in enrollment, at least I'm proposing to the Assembly to maintain that contribution of the 49 million that it was the prior year. So, and there's a couple things that we look at too, is the school mechanism for funding at the statewide level is based on enrollment. And so you might have heard the school district is grappling with some of those changes right now. They've had a reduction of about 2,000 students in the district that have gone to other programs. So they're not in the district or district programs. They're not in district programs, I guess, let me clarify that. And so what that does for us when we look at our contribution to the school district, we oftentimes look at it through that same lens of what is this per student contribution. So by maintaining that level at the level it was the prior year, I think it provides additional resources to the school district, even with that reduction on a per student basis than the reduction the state did. Okay, do we have other questions or thoughts? Jim, do you want to go any further into detail on that? I know we've got a presentation that we're going to be working on with the school board, I think on the 15th next week.
Yes, the 15th. So if folks want to listen in on the school board, we're going to go a little deeper into the local contribution and the school district budget on that night with the school board.
Yep. So if you're interested for another Zoom meeting, we'll have another one. Or actually, I think that one's in person. Is that?
You and I will be
figured
the
that out
person
yet.
there, but it'll be, I think the public will be able to join in via Zoom. Yeah.
Okay.
So Mayor Ward, I was just going to jump in real quick and just remind folks, if you would like to send in your question by email, which I can then pose to the mayor and chief of staff, please send that email to fnsblistens@fnsb.gov, and I'll be happy to pass that along. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Leanne. Or you can raise your hand if you've got a question physically, or you can use the raise the hand feature. And I think Alt-Y is the shortcut if you're on a computer. So I do want to also, I'll repeat myself multiple times here, but we do have this new website, our web page that we've stood up on fnsb.gov/budget. And that's going to be a tool that we're going to use throughout the budget process here to be able to provide information to folks on what we're doing and what things are looking like. So, okay. Okay, we've got a question, it looks like, about COVID CARES Act money. So the borough did receive, I want to say it was what, 26 million under the CARES Act CARES Act funding 1. There were some pretty tight restrictions on that. We developed a couple programs that we were able to use for that. The Assembly approved these 3 programs. We had a business interruption grant. We had a PPEG or a PPE reimbursement grant, and then a healthcare impact grant. And we were able to get out. We actually spent every dime of that program by the end of the year because that's what we were told were the rules. And then 2 weeks before the end of the year, they changed the rules on us and said, oh, you can have another year to spend that money. So we didn't, we were not going to chance it. The federal government and the state said those were the rules. So we did that. Those programs were incredibly helpful to a number of our businesses. I think we did over 400 grants that went out as part of that program. We did just hear, I think yesterday, the Senate approved the, I'm not sure what, it's the American Recovery Act, but I call it CARES 3 or COVID money 3, which is going to go out to provide assistance to the state and to local communities. As we look at it, we do have the allocation that's expected to come is based on population. So for our community, for the borough, it looks like it's going to be just under $19 million that'll be coming. But there are some very specific restrictions that come with that, just like the original funds. So it is not something that we can use for like for budget development purposes. We can't use it to supplant or to augment our current budget. It really has to be used for new things or eligible expenses. And so we're definitely still working through the details of what exactly that means. We don't have a plan that we've proposed to the Assembly yet. It still has to get reconciled with the House and Congress, and then ultimately signed by the President. So once the President does have that signed, we'll be able to start taking action on it. But that is a resource that's coming to our community. However, it's not necessarily something we're going to see as impacting our property tax stream, potentially our bed tax though. So they did allow, as part of the new bill, it does allow for revenue replacement for lost revenue. So for communities like ours, it's primarily our sales tax and bed tax areas, which we did see our tourism, hospitality and tourism industry has just really been hit very hard with the pandemic. So let's see here. We do have, I guess if I've got a captive audience, this is somewhat related to borough functions in our budget. We do have a COVID matrix that we stood up, which looks at the overall impact to our community. That's available on our website as well. Under the government tab, we've got a COVID section with a borough matrix. This looks at the overall risk factor here in the community, which we use to determine our operational status. So, okay, let's see. Jim he just shot me a question here. Do we have any Mary Cy fans in the audience? How about that? Can we get some hands? So Mary Cy facility is one. All right, we got a fan in the audience. So at least one, two. I'll count myself in there too. So the project has been completed, and we are looking at spooling back up again. So staff is in there. I think if they haven't started filling the pool, they're doing it like now. So they're going to check for leaks. Apparently that's a good thing to do if the pool's been empty for a year. Make sure the seals haven't dried up and whatnot. So, but we're looking, I think, at an April. Jim, we were saying April timeframe for opening?
Yeah, April, sometime mid-April, we should be able to reconfigure staff and programs at HAMI, make sure the pool doesn't leak, because apparently they leak if you leave them empty for a while too long. It's counterintuitive to me, but it's an engineering thing. But yeah, we got to check for all that, and then we should be pretty much ready to go.
Yep. So we are, for the upcoming budget year, we are planning on having full capacity in our facilities. So we're anticipating that there may be some impact in the early fiscal year, which starts July 1, but that we're hoping by the end of the year we can be back to full strength. So, Jim, it might be good to talk about too. I know this is something we get a lot of questions about, especially lately, is lapse and what that looks like and how that's factored in.
Yep.
So as folks may have heard the report in the newspaper, or if you pay attention to our assembly meetings, we did have a lapse last year. A lapse is when we talk about it in budget terms, is when your expenditures and your revenues did not meet, and in a good way, meaning that you didn't spend all the money that you had allocated or budgeted in the prior year. And so for the borough, we did have a lapse of funds. It was roughly about $11 million that was lapsed. Our assembly, as part of their fiscal policies, have instituted a section in code that talks about what to do with lapsed funds. And so a portion of those lapsed funds, 2/3 goes to the FMR for capital improvement. And then 5% of the remaining portion goes into the ARF, which is another fund, a reserve fund that we have, which is the Asset Replacement Fund. So in the past, these have been the primary mechanisms for funding these different special revenue funds. However, the Assembly has taken a more deliberate approach to these things in the past, and actually appropriates funds now into the capital improvement program. And so that's where a majority of those funds go. The lapse amount then actually reduces as it goes into the general fund, reduces the offset or the amount of fund balance that we may have used in the prior year or the current year budget. So for instance, this current fiscal year, we used, or the Assembly approved, an appropriation of roughly $5.5 million from fund balance to go towards property tax payment relief. So this is another mechanism that we look at in the budget process where the Assembly can use, by policy, they can't use future revenues. They can't say, we're going to institute a tax in the future and use that to balance the budget. It has to be numbers and finances that you actually have available. And lapse, unassigned fund balance, is one of those resources that we can use to keep the mill rate down and fund our budget. So that lapse has definitely been a topic of conversation at the borough. As we look at our COVID numbers, that's definitely one of the things that we've been concerned about is staffing. We've got a number of folks that have been out, positions that have been hard to fill. Folks haven't necessarily been looking for jobs, especially if they're traveling from out of state. So going into the next year, we are planning on being back to those full levels. And the goal is to not, if we have efficiencies, we're definitely going to find them, but to not lapse the same amount of money. We want to be better at budgeting our numbers for the upcoming year. Okay, do we maybe have other questions or thoughts, things that folks maybe want to share as far as considerations for the upcoming budget? Are there concerns? I know, I guess we were just talking, thanks Aline for popping on, popping off. One of the things that we talked quite a bit about with our legislators is school debt bond reimbursement. This is a very big bill that the borough pays every year. It's a major cost driver. So throughout the years, the state had an agreement for school debt bond reimbursement where the community would take out the bond, would take out debt to pay for school construction, and then the state would reimburse the community 70% of that note that was due every year. So for us, it's about $9 million a year. It was actually more than that a few years ago. We paid a few bonds off. And so of that 9 million, or excuse me, it's not 9 million, I think it's about 14 million. The state's contribution of what they historically have paid is $9 million. And so what that means for us is if the state does not pay that, does not give that, does not do reimbursement for school debt bond payments, then we have to pick up that tab as a community. And so this first happened under Governor Walker. He vetoed, I think, 50% of the school debt bond reimbursement. That was not overridden by the legislature. Governor Dunleavy then did the same thing last year, vetoed all of the school debt bond reimbursement, 50% the year before. And that leaves us in this year with the situation of what do we do? And so when we look at budget development, you can't necessarily not, school debt has to be paid for. We have to pay for it. And so do we account for it in our tax rate or not? So that's another big cost driver that we have. And really the ability for the mill rate to be impacted pretty dramatically. We did do some adjustments last year, as I mentioned, using fund balance to pay for things. But ultimately, you can only do that for so long. Your fund balance can only carry you for so long. It's not sustainable to use that as a resource to pay for your operations. Okay, Lenine, did you have a couple other questions that came in, or?
Oh, I was just going to try to encourage some folks to share their questions. What I mean is, I can see there's a whole bunch of folks that I know on here, and I don't want to have to start calling people out to in order to get some questions. But just a quick reminder to please go ahead and use the raise your hand feature if you have a question or a comment or something that you'd like to share, or you're also welcome to use the FNSB listens at fnsb.gov. Thank you.
Thanks, Lenine. And no pressure either. If you don't want to ask questions, that's okay tonight. This is really meant to be an educational component, and then just for us to make sure that we're, the administration, I'm being accessible for folks. We also do want to encourage folks to go back to that website. So we're going to be doing, we've got a couple short videos that we're putting together to talk about, hopefully more eloquently than I can, some of these components like your property tax bill, how is your assessment calculated? Why is that important? Looking at the budget, what are the cost drivers that we go and look at every year? How are those things impacted by our contracts and agreements? So we're going to really, we're trying to take a more precision approach. That's not the right word I'm looking for, but a very concerted effort to educate and provide the resources available for our residents to get educated on our budget.
So Mayor Ward, here's a question that's come in is regarding the capital improvement program is, when will additional projects be added, or when can other projects be considered for CIP?
Yeah, so that's as I mentioned, as part of our budget process, it's a big budget driver is our capital improvement program. The Assembly has put into policy, into code, a requirement that the borough mayor presents as part of their budget a contribution to the FMR based on revenues. So what we look at is the current code says that 9% of all revenues that are brought into the borough have to go into the FMR, at least in the proposed budget. The Assembly may choose to amend that or do something different. But for us, 9% is roughly $10 million. And so we put about $10 million a year into the capital improvement program, which is tremendous. To take that type of concerted approach, that very methodical approach to our capital needs and our deferred maintenance is a very wise thing for us to do as a community. We're able to move projects forward now that we have only really dreamed about in the past. So the capital improvement program outlines that. It's that's also available on our website. As you can tell, I'm a website fan for the borough. But the capital improvement program outlines our spend plan for the next 10 years. It is reopened every 2 years. So we have a resolution we're working on right now for adoption of the current year. It's basically just a revision. So we look at year 1 and year 2, and then every 2 years, so biennially, we update the capital improvement program, which means that we can add projects, we can take projects out, and we're actually going to be gearing up for that this fall. So starting, I think, in September, October is when we'll go out with the nomination period. So we'll be asking the community to get engaged, to kind of champion those projects that you want to see happen. And then that whole process we go through again, that capital improvement program process where we engage with the community, we get our nominations, we score them, we bring them back to the assembly, ask them to to rate them, if you will, pick out the ones that they want to move forward with, and then we build our spend plan. And the neat thing about that is we then start talking about future years, the projects that we want to see in the out years. And we have a 4-year program that as we've done 2 years, will then be that 2-year program that moves up years 3 and 4, moves into 1 and 2. And so we're able to really just start making progress on these things. I see we've got a Miss Rosenberg. I don't want to pick on you, but one of our animal shelter champions that has just been a tremendous asset for the community. And that's one of the projects that we have been asking for a decade for the legislature. And finally, through this program, we've said, you know what, this is important to our community. It's important for us to do, and so we're going to fund it. And the cool thing, as you can tell, I get excited about CIP. The cool thing about this process is, as we've built the program, it's completely sustainable without any debt. So the 10-year plan that we have, the library renovations, the pool renovation, the animal shelter replacement are all paid for with cash, with money from the borough that we're using, that we're not having to go out to debt for. So that's exciting for our community. It's pretty cool. Okay, Lenine, do we have other questions?
Mayor Ward, I am sorry to say I do not have any other outside questions from folks here. However, I did brainstorm a couple other things that maybe we could talk about. Is Sheena Lake survey is happening right now. And let's see. Sheena Lake survey, we could talk about that for a quick minute.
Yeah, so we do have a survey going on for the Chena Lake rec area. And I don't know if you're like me, I always call it Chena Lakes. And it seems like there's more than one lake, but there's actually only one. But this is a survey we're using to determine utilization of the facility, where people are going, what they're doing. Are they residents, non-residents, military members, non-military members? And it has the potential to be able to provide some resources for us for development of that project. So development of the park. We've got a number of phases that are within the capital improvement program that we're looking at funding. And there's some opportunities out there that we could take advantage of. So, you know, talking about budget, we do have, with the new budget page, we did link our old budgets to that as well. And so if folks are interested in looking at the prior year budget documents, those are available through our archived page. And that's a great tool as well for looking at comparative numbers. So I just encourage folks to check that out. So do we have questions, concerns? As we look at development of the budget, are there things that we maybe haven't talked about that folks would like us to maybe look into a little bit more? Miss Anderson, Miss Becky Anderson.
Hi there. Could you please share with us the status of the different buildings at Pioneer Park that have been a focus of repair?
Yes. So we went through a number of projects. We had a couple of projects we've been working on. The big one is the Centennial Building. We did have an operational closure. Goodness gracious, I think that was over a year ago now. A year and a half ago, honestly. And so we were able to make the repairs to the columns on that facility. So it is still operational. There was actually, through our budget process or a CIP process, we did look at providing potentially a replacement for that building. That was ultimately not approved. So the building is still operational. We're still working on it. I know the Arts Association is back in there. We have had, due to COVID, capacity issues with making that available for the public. But as far as I understand, it is open and available for folks. We do have a project that's ongoing that's starting this summer. It's with the church, the historic church there at the Pioneer Park. And so we're going to be doing basically beefing up the truss system and shoring up the walls. Let's see here. I'm a contractor. I should remember the bottom cord of the truss, the tie cord that is on the truss like this, is not adequate. And so over the last 100 years, that system has started to squat, which pushes the walls out. And so we've got a program to put some beams in there, pull everything back together, and then level the building as well. So that project is going to be ongoing over the summer. We also do have another project on the train. And so we're going to be working on the trestles this summer. And so that project is going to be ongoing. We're hoping to have that wrapped up by summer's end. We also are working on right now a new master plan for Pioneer Park. And so Donnie Hayes, who's the Pioneer Park manager, in conjunction with our contractor for that project, are working on development of a new master plan, which is going to look at our the facilities that we have out there, look at our historic buildings, and then really come up with a plan. Part of the plan is a new business model for the park. So how can we make it sustainable, or at least more sustainable? And then how are we going to recapitalize the assets that are there? How do we do it in a way that honors the historic nature of the park? It also keeps them safe and able to be utilized. The other big project that we're working on is the SS Nenana. So the SS Nenana is one of those treasures in our community that is extremely unique to us. I think there's only a handful of wooden riverboats left in the country. The Assembly did approve through the capital improvement program about $4 million that's going to be going to what we call life safety improvements for the boat. The goal is to get it opened up again so we can have tours and make that available for our community. And then we have phase 2 of that project in the out years on our capital improvement program to actually do a full restoration on the boat. So we're hoping to keep that treasure with us for quite a few years longer.
Thank you.
Did you have some follow-up, Ms. Anderson?
No, I just wanted to thank you very much for the information.
Not a problem. And we'll try to, when we get, we should have some planning sessions coming out for the Pioneer Park Master Plan. And so I'll make sure we get those out on our website and share on social media so everyone can stay engaged. It's a true treasure. Okay, we're talking Pioneer Park. We have another one of our projects in the capital improvement program is upgrades to the playground facility. And so this is a project that the Pioneer Park staff has been working on for a number of years. For many of you, you might have been a part of Spooky Town at Pioneer Park in conjunction with Access Alaska. And that's been a funding mechanism that we've used to pay for this redesign concept. And so they've got a really amazing proposal for redoing the park, making it accessible for all of our community members, and then really honoring the culture and tradition of the state. So it was in, I don't remember the exact date that they gave the presentation to the borough. They've got a really cool video put together. And I think Design Alaska might have been the one that helped put that together. But it's a really, we'll make sure and get that out for folks. But check out the master plan and then the Pioneer Park Playground project. Okay. Other questions, concerns, thoughts about our budget process? And this, by all means, doesn't have to be the end of our conversation. If you'd like to email me or the Assembly, we're very happy to hear your comments and to hear your thoughts on just on general borough things in general. So the Assembly's email is assembly@fnsb.gov. And then you can reach me. I think it's mayor@fnsb.gov is the best way to reach me through email. Okay.
So Mayor
Well-
Ward, I'm going to jump in just for a quick second here. I'm not, since
Yes.
we've been on our call here this evening, and just to bring to the attention, in case folks hadn't heard, that Governor Dunleavy and Commissioner Adam Crum have announced that they are opening up all eligibility for all Alaskans age 16 and older to be able to receive the COVID-19 vaccine. So great news for our community that we will, all of the tier eligibility restrictions have been lifted. So that just came out about an hour ago. And so we want to encourage folks, if you so like, to go ahead and check the DHSS website, covidvax.alaska.gov, and you can find out more information about the dates and locations for receiving the vaccine. Great news for our state. We'll be the first in the nation to remove all eligibility requirements for that.
Great, thanks, Lenine. That's some great news. I know we've just been doing really well as a community to get those vaccines out, and that's there's a number of places around town. We also do have the Carlson Center available for those that as a pod distribution. I know a number of folks have gone to some of our providers in town who are also providing that care as well. Okay, well, we don't have to stay here all night, although we can. Very much appreciate everyone being able to join us tonight. I hope you found this educational, informative. If you have suggestions on how we can make things better, or if there's certain aspects of the presentation that would be more helpful, our plan in the future is to do this maybe starting in December or January. So we can really truly engage with folks early on in the budget development process, where we're talking with the superintendent about the local schools contribution. We're looking at really developing some of the maybe changes in policy to implement in our budget. So that's really the time that we're hoping to do this next year. As I did mention, we've got our budget timeline that's available on our website. We also have our public participation plan, which outlines how we're going to communicate with the public about our budget process. I don't want this to be a big scary thing. This is an important document. It's an important policy document for our community, and I want everyone to have the best understanding that they can. So, all right. Well, thank you very much, everyone. I'm not seeing any hands go up. So, as with any good meeting, if we can call it short, that's probably a good thing, right? We've all got lots to do, and it's getting very nice outside. So I am very thankful for your time tonight. Everyone's been very courteous. Again, if you want to provide comment back to my office or the assembly, you can reach us through email, mayor@fnsb.gov or assembly@fnsb.gov, and we can get looped in on those things. So. Lenine, did you have some final comments?
Yeah, I was just going to mention also, me being the PIO for the borough, just that, and you mentioned it a few moments ago, that if there are other ways that we can communicate with the community, please let us know. Please give our office a call. My direct number is 459-1304. I'm happy to do the old-fashioned thing and take your name and phone number and write out your public opinion message as well. So my thanks to everyone for their participation this evening. Jim?
That's it. I think we'll call it early tonight. Like the mayor said, the weather's really nice, and if we can spend a little time with our families enjoying that, I think that's a good thing. So just as a last foot stomp reminder, we are in our process of our budget right now. We'll be having multiple opportunities to engage with comments and input on the budget. Go to the website, www.fnsb.gov/budget. You'll have all that information there. And we have 4 really good ways to connect with the borough. You can do it by mail. You can drop us a line at 907 Terminal Street, Fairbanks, Alaska, 99701. You can send an email to fnsblistens@fnsb.gov. Give us a call, 459-1304.